if we wouldn't have these stories of what it took to get to God, like you're saying, your brother had to do some of that stuff, but he can use those testimonies of, hey, I did that, and it wasn't fulfilling.
You don't have to get out there and put on this persona of who you wish you were. You don't have to put on a mask and teach people things you don't know or try to be someone that you're not.
Like the guy that I went to at the outing and said, man, where's your Bible study at? It's because I saw the restoration power of Jesus in their marriage, and it was like, man, I want that.
One of the best things you can do as a parent to show your kids who Jesus is and why it's so important to follow him is Welcome, Mr. Will. We are here on the first episode of what we are introducing as TNT, the Traditions and Trends podcast, where we bridge generations with traditional expertise and trend insights. My name is Luke Relfs. I'm the marketing director at Oracle Insurance, and with me, my co-host, Mr. Will Stephanie, the CEO of Oracle. How you feeling today,
I'm
Will?
feeling good. What's up, everybody? Yeah, it's kind of traditions, trends, old guy, young guy. There you go.
So it's going to be fun because we're having all kinds of different guests on the podcast. Me and Will are sitting down and chatting through all these different topics, whether it's faith, entrepreneurship, just all networking, right? Work-life balance, all these different things. And so there's a lot of freedom to just get some great insights from older, younger, experienced, less experienced, just social media, all the new stuff that's going on. And it's funny because we're rocking this here out as our first episode, but we have some episodes coming here in the future. We had filmed them at the office, then we got in here and started doing it at a studio. Shout out Love Church. And it's been super fun. So we'll be changing scenery a little bit, but for the most part, we'll be rocking everything out in this studio and rocking this look. So it's going to be fun. And today, to start the podcast off, we wanted to keep it pretty simple and just share a little bit about ourselves and our testimonies. I think one of the most powerful things you can do is simply share with others where you've been, what your life looked like before you were following Christ, the just story of how he saved you, how he's transformed your business. We'll get into all that stuff. And so today's going to be fun. We're just going to ping pong a little bit, kind of talk about our stories and how being a believer has impacted your business. And so start at the beginning, wherever you want to start of, did you grow up going to church? What did it look like for you to come into your faith even a couple years ago, and where the beginning of that really started at for you?
Yeah. Our paths, in our faith journey have been kind of different. You were kind of raised in a Christian household. I was, raised Catholic. Nothing against Catholic, but, growing up, we were never reading the Bible. I didn't, I knew the stories of the Bible, but didn't really know what they meant truly to me and what Jesus did for us. So yeah, just kind of going back through that, didn't really know God, knew of him, knew of Jesus, but didn't going through high school, junior high, college, he was completely out of my mind. And then got married at a pretty young age, to a high school sweetheart.
Let's go.
She was kind of like PT would say, she was always dragging me to church, like his mom dragged him to church all the time. But yeah, so she would always try to get me to church. I'd get there. They'd be talking about donating money, tithing to him. And I'm like, oh, it's always about money. It's always about money. But just, it was more in my heart. I was just kind of always stiff arming him. Married, marriage was good. We had a good marriage. My wife's awesome. But there was always something, just missing, mainly through, how I was loving her and how she was loving me back. We could tell there was just, something was just missing in it. But anyway, so have kids, start a business, kind of get a little pride going in being a business owner and, trying to be the guy, like the man that's making the money, like doing all these things. So just kind of kept going through that. God brought me to my knees a couple times. I didn't know he did, but he also helped me get through it. And now looking back, I can see those things, but really the biggest thing that happened was, after a couple pretty, lost my father, went through some pretty traumatic stuff at work, I about threw the towel in a couple times. And then, and then kind of the political campaign, the COVID period hit, and I just kind of lost my mind. Just kind of, I'm a pretty calm guy. My kids never see me raise my voice, and I'd be screaming at the TV just because I was so upset of all the division, all the miscommunication that was going on.
Yeah.
And even in myself, I'm like, man, how do I lead my family to what is actual truth when I can't even discern out there, who's right, who's wrong.
Yeah.
I started getting pretty vocal on like social medias on what I thought was right. Definitely one-sided. So the kids were starting to be like, man, Dad's screaming at the TV. Dad's more upset than he normally is. And even in that time, I was still, partying pretty hard. There's had pride, anxiety going on from all the stuff going on, being a business owner, trying to do it all on my own. And then was at a get together one time at a neighborhood thing, and bumped into a guy who I had known when I was, really in the party mode in my younger years, and had seen a dramatic change in him and his wife. He, almost got divorced, and then they just had a radical change in their marriage. He came to Christ and just completely changed, got back together with his wife, and just changed the whole life of his family. And I just went to him one day and said, man, when's your Bible study?
Yeah.
And he's like, dude, it's on Thursdays. I was like, all right, man, I'm going to come by. And I remember driving to the Bible study. It was at the 180 house, my OC's Thursday Bible study. And, like all those little lanes to pull in there, you can almost miss it. Well, I missed it. And I like drove by, and I'm like, oh, man, I missed it. And I'm like, maybe I'll just go to Chipotle. I was like I could tell I was like trying to get out. I'm like, no, man, just go. So I pulled in, and there was 6 dudes in there, and we just broke open the book of Timothy. And, man, it just like, I remember walking out of there that first day, and I just sat in my car and cried because I was like, and it was these dudes pouring into me and just opening up the Bible and having them help me read through the Bible. Like I said, I had never really tried to do that. And, man, I just walked out just like, this is the truth. This is it. And right after that, just kind of jumped in like full throttle, jumped into the Bible, jumped into serving at church, jumped into just getting to know more, watching, Skip Heitzig and David Guzik and just all these guys online to try. I was just thirsty for it. Once I was like, man, I found it. And all of a sudden, I mean, it was like, for me, it was like, some people, it's like a gradual thing. And take this for what it is. Like, I'm still human, right?
Yeah,
so it's still a roller coaster, and I'm still figuring this out 3.5 years into it. But it was just like, man, right away, I was just like, I want to learn more about this. And my kids just saw an instant change in me. My wife was like, wow. Cause like that next weekend after that, her nephew was getting married. And usually we'd be like, party all night long, right? This DJ's got it going on. And I was like, I had, one cocktail, and I was like, hey, honey, I want to go home early because I want to be at the 9 o'clock mass at Love Church coming up. And she's like, really? And she goes over and tells her sisters, like, hey, we're going to leave early because Will wants to go to church. And they're like, what?
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it was just like an instant thing that I wanted to like get plugged in. I was serving like the first week we went. It was at God's Garage, which was awesome. And yeah, just started to change, started to act differently at the office because I was kind of one of those sarcastic jerks on the phone to people if they weren't agreeing with me, like I try to like demean them. And, and my staff could hear me on the phone, and all of a sudden they could hear me loving on people more than doing what I used to do to them. And so it was just a complete shift in my mindset. Just when I started getting in the Bible every day, started hanging out in men's groups and like sharing with open dudes, and just, and then the biggest thing was, man, I learned how God's design was for marriage on how to love my wife. Cause that was probably the biggest thing, is that love and respect thing was missing. I wasn't loving her properly because she wasn't giving me full respect, as and for men, that's a big deal, but I didn't deserve it because I wasn't leading properly in our household. So, once that, started to shift, and I'll tell you what, once I was somebody to respect more, again, still human, so still working through things, but man, she started loving me a lot more. And when, we love when our wife loves us, right? You know, she was more affectionate towards me, more letting me lead when she knew I was leading the way God wanted me to lead a household. So man, it just completely flipped how I worked in my marriage, how I parented, how I run the business, you know, more of a godly focus. I mean, that's why we do this, right? Because we just want to share, man, how God can change your life, how he can change your work, change just everything. And once you have a purpose and a plan to it, and that's what he lays out for you, like, hey, here's what I want for your life, and here's how Jesus did it. You know, he's the absolute role model that we can follow, and it just flipped everything.
Thank you so much for watching the podcast. We are going to get right back to it, but I just wanted to thank our sponsor of this podcast, Oracle Insurance. As many of you know, let's be real, everything is more expensive these days. Our gas, our groceries, our food, everything. But insurance doesn't have to be that way. If you're figuring out that you're paying way too much for your home, auto, life, any of the things as far as your insurance goes, go ahead and call the number on the screen, and I will also link the website in the description below. It's completely free to get a quote and just see if we can help you out and save you some money. But thanks so much for tuning in. Let's get back to it. What would you say to somebody that has recently come to Christ as well and maybe hasn't felt as much of a, oh yeah, I'm just so ready to get plugged in with everything and this and this.
Yeah.
Maybe they're kind of struggling, transitioning into a different friend group, getting plugged in, meeting people at the church that they're at. What would you say to someone that's kind of walking through that? I don't really know what this looks like, and it maybe hasn't been easy for me to just jump full in with all of this stuff.
It was nice for me when I came to Christ, is because like we were in the garage, so it was smaller,
Yeah.
right? You know, so that's one thing, you know, like we talk about it in my men's group on Friday, is like, as the church grows, how do we keep people plugged in? And that's why, you know, in our church, small groups is the biggest thing. First of all, you know, just like the game plan we have at church, man, daily be in the word.
Yeah.
Right. Because I mean, we could talk about that for days, like how reading the same verse this year, next year, every year, it hits you different, right? Because it just hits you. It's just amazing. That's that's the magic of it. But then getting plugged into small groups, so you're surrounded by dudes. But that is hard. Like right when you come to Christ, like my friend group, I love the friends I hung out with, but they, you know, it just wasn't. It's better to be surrounded by people that are going to keep you on the path and you know, knock you upside the head if you're getting off the path, right? But that is hard because you're kind of, sometimes you feel alone.
Yeah.
And I felt that way. I'm sure you have as well.
Yeah.
That's why I'm excited to hear like what it was you growing up in high school as a Christian and stuff. And so that is tricky to find that, you know, that path. And then even, you know, one thing you always got to remember is, man, when you come to Christ, now you're like, the devil's after you now, because now you're a threat.
Yeah.
Right? I was helping him out before, right? So now I'm a threat. So now you're going to have those attacks coming at you. And he's, you know, just going to try to be beating you up that way. But yeah, it's just getting plugged in is huge, you know, serving at church. Cause that's probably the biggest thing that got me plugged in quicker is the first week I jumped in and started just opening doors for people at church.
Yeah.
They didn't even have anybody doing it. I'm like, oh, I'll just do this, you know? And then I got to know people and they got plugged in serving. Men's group was huge. And then we had events that we did at Hope Center for Kids, at Abide, and just went down there and started helping out, starting getting more, you know, and it feels good to do that, but that's not why we're doing it. Cause that's what Jesus calls us to do, is to serve others and, not to be served. So it's just, that's probably the biggest thing that helped me, is just getting daily word, small group, getting plugged in, and just being involved in it.
Yeah, that's so huge. You talk about just going through a little bit sometimes of a season of loneliness, and I think that's a common theme for a lot of people. I think there's just this power in when we've surrounded ourselves with all of these people, by all of these people that weren't great influences. They weren't lifting us up. They weren't encouraging us. They weren't calling us higher. When we eventually, God starts to lead us down a different path, and we realize that there's a decision that has to be made to go this way or go that way, that he allows you to go through this wilderness season, if you will, of truly having to depend on him. And even not in the context always of friends and different things. I think the same can be true of your business, right? Just leading your business through the lens of having a relationship with God and really hearing from him. You talked a little bit about how becoming a believer and just your attitude, your leadership, how all that shifted for the better when you became a believer. Do you feel like there were any kind of times of that wilderness season a little bit where you know that God just helped you lead through crisis is something we talked about, but just was there any time in business where you're like, dude, you know, even in the last couple years since I got saved, this story might have been completely different if I wasn't a believer and really relying on God to lead through me?
Oh yeah. I mean, cause a big thing for me, like prior and still, you know, I still, you know, have anxiety, you know, when I start getting like, when I start losing faith and there's times where you get a little, you know, off or disconnected, but yeah, I mean, there's times I look at since I've came to Christ that how I would have reacted prior to would have been completely different. But yeah, now looking back on things, it's just, okay, God, what are you trying to teach me in this? How, you know, cause he's just trying to sharpen you more. Cause that's one thing I always tell myself is like, he's getting us ready for the biggest battle we're ever gonna, if Christ comes back soon, you know, we're getting ready, he's getting us ready, and, you know, he's going to pick 144,000 to be in his army, and like, hey man, I'd love to be one. It may be the Jews or whoever, but you know, he's getting us ready for that, and getting us ready for that tribulation time. And we just, every little thing that he puts in our life that he's going to get us through is just to help build us up and to make us stronger. So there's things that I look at that happens coming to Christ, and, you know, just, first of all, go to him first. Hey, what are you trying to show me? You know, just pray on it. Like, hey, help me see what I'm trying to learn through this, what you're trying to teach me. And it just kind of it takes that anxiety away, and then also knowing like, hey, at the end of the day, I'm going to heaven. It just gives you that kind of peace that money's not everything. He could take everything away. I still have a beautiful wife. I still have beautiful kids. I still have his promise that if I follow him, that I get to go to heaven and have no pain, no tears, nothing. So I think just that for me has been the biggest thing, because I'm an anxious person. I like being in control. And when he sits me down and it's like, no, I'm on the throne, I'm in control. And I'm like, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah, that's probably the biggest thing for me.
Yeah. Again, we hit on this theme because it's so big, and I love that our church just hammers on this idea of self-feeding, that you could go to church every Sunday, potentially even be in a small group or do these different things, but the real life change takes place when you get in the Bible for yourself every single day. There is something new and fresh that God wants to show you about who he is, about his promises, about his plan, his good and perfect and pleasing will for your life that we can only discover when we open the Bible and hear from him. It's like this playbook for life, like we say. What was the biggest thing that changed for you of just, hey, I'm going to make this a discipline to get in the Bible every single day? What'd you see happen in your life as you made that a commitment?
I'd go back to that peace again. You know, starting the day for me, I get up early, and the first thing I do is open up the Bible and do our daily reading. That's what one thing I love about Love Church is having that reading plan that we're all reading the same thing. And you know, it's super exciting. Like you know, right now we're in the book of Matthew and Exodus, the Old Testament. And it's just like, you know, the first couple times going through the Old Testament, I was like, wow, this is crazy. You know, like it's kind of sometimes boring. But now the more and more I'm in it, man, I'm just like, this is awesome. Like just to hear like how this all became. But I think for me, yeah, it's just that piece to start out in the morning, get the word, you know, just kind of get into it, really try to pick it apart and just kind of see what he's trying to tell you in the day. And I like said earlier, like every time you get in it, it's just, even if it's something you've already read a couple times, like it speaks to you exactly how you need to be spoken to that day. I mean, it's living, right? And yeah, that's the biggest thing for me is just waking up, getting in that, and it just sets the tone for the day. Cause there's days where maybe I don't get to it till in the evening cause it's a busy day or on vacation or something like that. And I can tell like in my spirit, that it's just not, I'm just not the same as I am when I get in it. So
It's so crazy how that works. There is just such a difference, especially after so many times. It really is. It's like training in the gym. You can feel it if you've been out of it for a week or even a couple days or a day, whatever the case
years
is.
in my
So it's pretty crazy how that works. But yeah, for me, it was definitely a somewhat of a different story. I don't have as much life lived in.
No, I know, but I just think
general.
it's so interesting. That's why I want to hear your side of the story, just because, you know, starting as a young Christian, and then that's how we got to know each other, is by right when you were kind of a couple years out of high school, right? And we started doing that book review with PT, and that was huge for me to see a couple. I mean, there was like 4 or 5 young guys that were just talking about Jesus and just excited. And I'm like, what? This is weird. Like, I was like on Saturday morning still hungover, like laying in bed. So that's why I was like, man, you guys were such a big pickup for me. And that's why I want to hear your story. Like, how did it start for you? What was junior high and high school like? Because, like when I grew up, like there was nobody, I don't remember one person in high school or junior high talking about Jesus once. Like,
so crazy.
I can't remember that at all. And I can't remember a parent ever bringing it up or anything. So that to me blows my mind that there are kids that did that. And it's cool to see kids right now talking about, like, Rev last night, bunch of kids, 31 kids get baptized or something like that?
So dope.
Let's go. So that's why I want to hear your story, because that's so different from how I grew up.
Yeah, right. It's pretty wild when I think about it. I totally attribute the mindset that I have, the peace that I have, the self-belief that I have, and that it's been pretty prevalent in my life from being a younger teenager to now, and all these different times. I can look back and see, man, just because I knew who God was and had my identity in him, it didn't mean there weren't rough things. I remember my parents would remember too, I moved schools in 6th grade, and you wouldn't think it's that big of a deal, but I had all these friends in elementary school, and we were going to keep getting older, go to middle school together, go to high school together. And it's like, I have all these friends, totally out there. Like, I've always been a fun kid for the most part, pretty easygoing, just conversation flowing with whoever. And I don't know what happened in 6th grade, but I switched schools, and my parents literally remember talking about dropping me off, and all the kids are kind of waiting outside before they go in, and it's just me just standing there like looking around. I don't know a single soul, and I don't know what it was, but later that year, I just remember literally like crying to my parents. Like, I was just having the worst time. There's kids making fun of me. I have like one friend. It's just this weird kind of thing that was going on. And sometimes I feel like middle school in itself was just a blur a little bit. I'm
everybody's
only,
changing.
I'm only 24 going on 25 soon. And sometimes I'm like, what even happened in middle school? It's like, I remember that because that was not a very fun time, but was always involved in church. My family was always going to church. I was in youth group on Wednesday nights or Sunday nights, going on missions trips here and there. But I never felt like my faith was really my own until probably the end of high school, like junior, senior year of high school. I remember a good buddy of mine now coming to our school for the first time. He lived in California, came to our school, and he was one of the people that was really living the life out. He was a believer, and he wasn't swearing, and he wasn't doing this. I was never super big into partying or drinking or doing anything wild in high school. I had like a tight-knit group of friends, couple dudes. We didn't really do that a whole ton, like towards the end of high school, maybe a little bit, but it wasn't this crazy kind of deal. But I just always remember feeling called by God. It's like I never could run away from the fact that God was like, no, like you're mine. I've pursued you, and you're not going to be able to leave me alone. Essentially, you're not going to be able to. And so I'm so grateful for it looking back now, but there were definitely some difficult times of being super involved, getting chances early on when I was doing music to perform. I got to go on tour for a couple years right after high school. And then even in those late years of high school, got to perform at Rev, which is our youth group at Love Church back in the day, and all kinds of different things. But my story was a lot of, one, just a roller coaster of faith, and two, a little bit of this one foot in the world, one foot out. It was always it was always like there wasn't really ever a season where I was so far removed from the church and being involved, because I always felt called. I always knew, like, dude, at the end of the day, I know that my main purpose is to make God's name great and to share about him with other people, to effectively communicate his truth and love to people who might not have heard it in that way before, that really resonates with them and bring some more understanding to them. But because of that, I know that I was so targeted of just being pulled to the wrong people, pulled into the wrong things, pulled into the wrong kind of focus in my life. And so, yeah, it was just a lot of one foot in the world, one foot out. I'd have seasons where I was like, oh my gosh, like, what am I doing? I'm done doing all this stuff. And then, you know, months later, I'd be right back to it. And it was just this rough roller coaster of being in and out, of really involved. And I remember going on tour, and I'm literally getting the chance to share the gospel and watch hundreds, if not by the end of it, thousands of kids give their life to Jesus. Like, when I actually really, really think back on the opportunities we got to be in small towns, middle of nowhere, and then we're doing, you know, a school of 2,000, 3,000 people in California, just all over the board. There were times where we would do an outside of school event. We were essentially, me and a couple people were touring a girl. Her family essentially sold their car, sold their house, quit their jobs, put all their money into an RV and a small house in the middle of nowhere in Missouri where the dad's parents lived. And they took this girl on tour, and I got to be a part of it. So it's like they were full blown on this deal for a couple years. And so we went to schools and churches, and the whole goal was to get in the schools. We do an anti-bullying kind of messaging, and then we would do a show at one of the local churches and help connect those kids with a local church and do another show. And then we'd present the gospel there. And so I got to present the gospel at all these different shows. And I'll never forget, there were...
And you're what age at this time?
I'm like 18, 19, 20. So this is right after I graduate. You know what I mean? I'm 18, 19, 20, those couple years. I never went to college. This just popped in my lap. I had even put a deposit down to go to a school and learn recording arts and music. Still, that's what I wanted to do. And then this whole thing transpires, just totally shifts what I was doing, but it was amazing. And I'm getting to see like hundreds of kids get saved. Like, God used me to play a small part in hundreds or thousands of kids getting saved. And then I have the audacity to like continue to go do dumb crap when I go home. And it was just so difficult. And there were just multiple points where I had to be like, dude, no, like, I'm sick of letting the enemy use my gifts, or, you know, water down my personality and who God's created me to be, to just submit to something that's not what God has for me. I know God has great plans for me, but it's going to take some participation on my part. And so, yeah, there were a lot of times where it was this back and forth, and it was difficult, but I always felt called by God and knew, like, dude, his ways are the best ways. His timing's the best timings. Whatever he says is going to be the best thing. I just couldn't get away from it in the best way. And I'm really grateful for that. But it was definitely difficult. There were, like you said, sometimes it felt like there weren't a ton of people who really were living their faith. I think a lot of people call themselves a Christian, especially when they're younger. But then we have to look at, man, does our life reflect that? Is there fruit in our life from that claim? Yeah.
You said one thing that you felt like when you were young in your faith, like it wasn't your faith. How as a parent, like there, you know, if there's parents watching or people that are planning on having kids, how do you help it, help the kid make it their own faith without, you know, because as a parent, it's our heart that, man, our kid knows Jesus. Yeah. Just because you never know. Like I just buried a young cousin of mine. Yeah. And it's like, how do you as a parent help your, you know, not push your kid, but help make sure your kid knows Jesus and the heart? Like how would you have made that your own, or how did you finally make it your own?
No, that's an amazing question. I think one of the best things you can do as a parent to show your kids who Jesus is and why it's so important to follow him is model it yourself.
Yeah. Pretty simple.
We're certainly not going to be perfect, but there's so much power in when a kid sees their parents, a healthy marriage, they love each other, they respect each other, they handle things in the right way. Again, not perfection, but there's a whole different element to a kid seeing that from their parents, that, oh man, this actually makes sense. So my parents genuinely love each other and they seem super fulfilled and they're successful in what they do. God blesses the things that they do. I think that's one of the most important things is one, just model it. Two, I think sometimes we put a little too much emphasis on other people teaching. I don't want to say our kids, I don't have kids yet, but it's funny. I'm already at the age I'm really starting to think like that more so than just a kid, if you will. But I think sometimes we put it on other people, the pastors, the youth pastor. I look back and I'm really grateful for the times I used to do this little Saturday morning deal with my dad. We'd go to Hy-Vee and we'd get a donut and just open the word. And sometimes those days I'm 12, I'm whatever. And I'm like, oh, this is kind of boring. But I look back and I love those things. I always remember my parents praying with me. But I'll never forget the day when I'm a young kid. I'm probably 10, 11 years old, maybe even younger. And my dad is sitting with me at my bedside. I'm going to bed. And he just looks at me and he says, Luke, God is going to use you to change hundreds of thousands of lives. I'll just never forget that. It's something that stuck with me forever. And this is what I'm talking about when I say parents, like, we got to take some accountability to teach our child up in the way they should go. The Bible says, train your child up in the way they should go and they will not depart from it. Not, they might not depart from it. They probably won't depart from it. The Bible is true and it's clear and it's a promise. Train your child up in the way they should go and they will not depart from it. It doesn't mean perfection, but it means that we got to take some accountability to train our children up in the way they should go. Another moment that has stuck with me is this too. I remember once I did something stupid, whatever it was, young kid, and I'm supposed to get in trouble. I'm waiting up in my room for my dad. I'm just like, oh no, this is going to be bad. Like, whatever you think about it, I got spanked. I got all those different things. Like, maybe we don't need to get all into that, but I'm thankful for it. I don't look back. My parents were abusing me. Like, come on, bro. It's like it needed some
you
some
knew
discipline.
You deserved it, right?
Yeah. It's like, what else do you expect? The whole take your phone away corner thing. It's like some of the stuff only works so well. You know what? We don't have to get all into that, but I was probably getting a spanking or whatever the case is. And I remember my dad comes up to my room, same deal. He's not talking down to me, literally gets on my level, just gets on his knee. And he's like, Luke, you're supposed to get in trouble for what you did. I probably should be serving out this punishment to you. But he said, even more than punishing you and you hopefully learning from this, I want you to understand the concept of grace. And that God has grace for us when we mess up and we do dumb stuff. And he said, this time I'm not going to punish you and I'm not going to spank you and I'm going to show you grace. And I hope that teaches you more than me punishing you in this way. I'll never forget that. I hope to have a moment with my future kids someday where I can say that, where they know, hey, this is biblical as well. There's punishment and there's consequence for sin. But at the same time that God loves us and he's graceful and he's gracious and being able, that's again, I can't remember every time I got spanked or this happened or I got punished or this thing got taken away from me or I couldn't hang out with my friends. I remember that. I remember that. And the third thing I would say is not forcing it by any means, but cultivating an environment in the church or otherwise where your kids can be around good mentors. It's so huge for them to see a high school kid, a college kid living for Jesus, teaching them, hanging out with them. I think about PT and Denise, our pastors, Blaze and Zion, their sons. I felt like they always had great older dudes to look up to where they're like, man, it's not just my parents telling me that this Bible stuff works, that this God stuff works. I'm looking at this guy and this guy and this guy on the worship team and this rev leader, whatever the case is. And these dudes are cool. And I want to be like these guys and hang out with them. And they're sold out for Jesus.
They grew up because the church kind of started in their basement. You know, and it's like they saw that they just grew up with it. And, and they did. They turned out just awesome dudes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, so that's been so helpful. But those are the three things I would say for sure is just modeling it, taking accountability to pray with them, to get in the word with them, to really walk it out with them, and then setting up a way for them to be around some other people that aren't you. Because at the end of the day, they're going to have those seasons of rebellion where they're like, mom and dad are an idiot. They don't know what they're talking about. So when they have some of that netting in the back to be like, okay, wait a second, I'm hearing a lot of other people say the same things that they're saying. Maybe they're onto something.
That's so good.
What do you feel like how's that looked for you? Just parenting your kids, what's it looked like even as a new believer? Because I think sometimes that can be some weight. Is like, shoot, I'm just trying to lead myself and lead my wife, and then as a man and having kids, like now it's my responsibility, as I understand, to lead my children. Obviously, you're still parenting and all the things you had been doing, but what did the shift look like once you were parenting them through a biblical lens?
Yeah, it's been a learning experience for sure, because it wasn't modeled by my parents. My parents are awesome. They just weren't, churchgoers that much either, and weren't in the Bible. So it's been something I'd had to learn. And it's, as a parent, like I was kind of timid at first just because, I didn't want to be like, all right, I'm on fire now. You guys, you better get in the Bible, kind of the same thing. I wanted to I would say, like, I loved how you said that, making it their own. I wanted them to make it their own. And I'll take our middle daughter. She's, very thoughtful in everything she does. Like she thinks it through. She's in engineering. She's going to school for engineering. So she's very smart. All my kids are, but she thinks things through. She never makes any quick judgments on anything. And I remember she was probably the slowest one to get into it because, she was in school, and school said, this is how it was created, a big boom. And then we climbed out of the water and we came from frogs, whatever, and so she had heard all this stuff. And so she's just kind of like slowly taking it in and easing into it. And then, all of a sudden, and she, plays percussion, and all of a sudden she just started to get closer and closer and started to get in her Bible and started to read it and without even saying anything to us really. And then all of a sudden she's like, hey, I think I'm ready to get into worship, playing worship and, all this stuff. And I started to see it. And then I'm like, wow, like I didn't have to force it on her. And she just started getting involved. And now she's at Kansas State. And it's so cool. She called a couple of weeks ago and was like, hey, Dad, I'm thinking I need to start a Bible study on our floor at our dorm. And I'm like, I'm like trying to hold back tears, right? I'm
awesome.
like, this is awesome. So we had a little like FaceTime call, like, hey, here's how I do my Bible study that I lead, and here's how we do I'm in 3 Bible studies. So like, here's how we do this one, here's how we do this one. She's like, yeah, here's what I think I'm gonna do. And it's going great. She's got 12 people, coming to a Bible study. And I'm like, this is awesome.
That's
and then
sweet.
And then, and then even for her, like every time she comes back, she's like, if we got something going on, she's like, well, I definitely want to make it to church, because she doesn't get to make it back to Love that often. So it's just cool to see that she has that burning desire, and, and kids are different, they're at different ages, different stages. You got girls and boys are different, boys, we mature a lot slower, and I just like, my son, I think I look back to me, like I had to try things like, we'll jump off a cliff just to see what happens. Right. And, I think for boys, it's a little bit different, but yeah, it's tricky because I don't want to force it on them. But I do, You're like, I don't want you to miss out.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's tricky.
I remember talking to my mom once, and she was going through something similar with my sister at a time. And I just had to remind her, I really felt the Holy Spirit prompt me to tell her just, how do you think that God feels? You've mentioned it before, but we're all God's children. So if we can really put ourselves in this position of how would God handle this? How can I love my son or daughter? How can I raise them up? How can I control my temper or show them what's right without forcing it on people? But when you think of it through the lens of how much more does God want us to experience? But what does he do? He doesn't just come in, oh no, you're not doing what I know that you should be doing, and I know best, and so I'm going to make this and this happen.
Let's do another flood.
Yeah, Right. And so it's this crazy deal that I just even reminded my mom, like, think about how God feels. Imagine the things you're feeling, God feels it 10, 100, 1,000 times
Yeah,
fold
so
for
true.
his daughter. It's your daughter, but it's his daughter first that
right.
he's given to you to do.
steward,
And so
yeah.
there are going to be those times. It was the same deal with my brother, where for years in college, he was kind of having his party phase and just hang out phase and whatever. And now he's really locking in. He's like, dude, no, I've always kind of known that this was the right path for me. And my parents have modeled it. And I've been in church and I've seen this and I've seen that. I've lived plenty of life now without it. And I do understand that, oh, this is actually a lot better if I read the Bible and I rely on God's strength. And he's having to unlearn some things and just allow God to work in his life. And God's desire is that we don't have long periods of that we do just love and trust him. But there's also verses about, I will restore the years that the locusts have eaten, that even when there are periods, long or short, in our life that we haven't been fully dedicated to our walk with God, that as soon as we're in, he's always been there. He's just waiting for us to turn and to start following him and listening to what he has to say. So it's just another deal of, I know what you mean. I was just thinking that same thing of, like, what's the line on forcing them, but not? And I think there is a good balance. And that's just, again, where the power of prayer comes in, that if we're truly seeking God in anything that we're doing in our job, in our leadership, in our ministry, in our parenting, in our serving, all of those things, there's so much clarity when we seek God's will for those things rather than get into the, oh, well, this is what we do. And this is how I run the business. And this is how I parent my kids. And this is how we do ministry, because this is what we've always done. When we can keep it raw and real and just hear from God on a consistent basis on what he wants to do and how he would have us act, then things shift. Pretty dramatically.
But it's just, that is huge. And I think, that's why testimonies, that's why we're doing this, right? That's why testimonies are so big. Because you never know. We were talking in our men's group on Wednesday. We have people at the church that have lost loved ones, maybe a spouse or a child, and they're leaning into that and helping others that are going through the same thing. But if we wouldn't have these stories of what it took to get to God, like you're saying, your brother had to do some of that stuff, but he can use those testimonies of, hey, I did that, and it wasn't fulfilling. It was empty. I was lonely. Didn't feel love, and then I came back to Jesus, and it's so even that simple of a story. But some of the stories you hear about marriages that like the guy that I went to at the outing and said, man, where's your Bible study at? It's because I saw the restoration power of Jesus in their marriage. And I was like, man, I want that, you know, but if I would have saw that dramatic change, I maybe would have been like, there's nothing to see there. Right. So I think that's the testimony are so big. And that's what the Bible is, just a testimony of God's grace and the power of God throughout the whole thing. Right.
Yeah. I love that. It's just an encouragement to anybody to share your story. A big thing that I've learned as far as creating content and being online and doing all these different things is you don't have to get out there and put on this persona of who you wish you were. You don't have to put on a mask and teach people things you don't know or try to be someone that you're not. I've heard so many stories of people meeting other people that they saw online or they had this kind of brand, and then they meet them and they're like, that person is not at all how they appeared online. They appear really confident, or they appear like this or that, like they're really nice and really trying to help, and then they're just not. Right. And so I think it's huge that we simply document and don't create. We just share what God's doing in our lives. We're sharing with other people our story, because there are people out there waiting to be impacted by the story that you have, by what God has done in your life. And when we can take those hard things that we've learned and teach them to other people and help them to hopefully avoid those same mistakes, there's a lot of power in that. I know that God wills for us to use the things that we've been through. We always say it, our test turning into our testimony, our pain turning into our purpose, our mess turning into our mission, right? That God wants to use these things that have plagued us, that he didn't set up, that he didn't throw upon us, that we sometimes even got ourselves into. He wills that we would use those things ultimately for his glory. And so I'd encourage anybody to share your story, to be real and raw and vulnerable about what God has done in your life. You never know who could be out there that will be impacted by what has happened in your life. So share your story more, share your testimony more.
Yeah. And for guys, man, it's not a weakness.
Yeah.
Right. Because the world tells us to be strong, not show emotion, not show weakness. And it's like, we're all broken. We're all sinners. We're all weak in some sense. So it's like, I mean, as guys, let that guard down. Just, humble yourself and know that you do need a Lord to Savior. And again, like you said, just share that if you're going through something. That's what I love about all the men's groups I'm in, man. Everybody, and it's like high level business owners, super successful dudes. And man, I don't think there's one of them that somebody's not crying in saying, man, I need you guys' support. And we all put our arms around each other and man, we get through stuff. I mean, it's huge to do that.
Yeah.
Just to open up like that.
Yeah, it's so good. Well, just wanted to knock this first episode out and really share our testimonies. Thanks for being on here with me as usual and just sharing about what God has done in your life. Like I said, share your story more. God has done amazing things in your life. Share it with other people. There's so many people that will be impacted by this. And so we got a lot more coming on the Traditions and Trends podcast. Amazing guests talking about entrepreneurship, faith, how they have used who God has created them to be to impact other people. Really excited for the coming weeks. We got all kinds of other stuff and we're going to be rocking and rolling this. So Mr. Will, thanks for sitting down with me and rocking this out, but we will see y'all next time on the next episode of Traditions and Trends.
Peace out.